Bienvenidos, Ushamdid, and welcome Anne Arundel Community College learners from CTS-130, Section 402 for the spring 2021 semester. This is the Cisco Networking Academy Introduction to Networks version 7 course curriculum, and in this tutorial, we're going to be taking a look at Packet Tracer Activity 10.1.4, where we're going to be configuring initial router settings. And so up until this point in the course, we've spent the majority of our time working with switches, and now we're going to turn our focus and attention to configuring a router. Now, we've got our objectives here. You can see there's no addressing table because we're simply going to be connecting in here with a console cable and then applying some basic configuration commands to the router. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to establish that console connection to router 1 from PCA. And so remember, if I hover down here over the lightning bolt in the bottom left, you can see that it says connections. If I click on the connections, I've got all kinds of different connections here. We've got automatically choose connection. I've got the console or the rollover cable, or like I said, you'll commonly hear this referred to as the blue Cisco cable. We've got the straight through. We've got a crossover cable. I've got a fiber cable here that we can run, but we're interested in this console cable. So we click on that, and when I move up here, you can see it kind of turns it into a little RJ45 connector here. So I'm going to click on that. We're going to select RS232. That would be the port that we would plug into the PC side. And then over here, you've got, again, the RJ45 connector that's actually going to go right into the console port. And it looks like an Ethernet cable, but the pinout is a little bit different, right? So the pin coloring of the cables that are in there is different than if this was a straight through or a crossover cable. All right, so now that we've connected the console cable to router 1, we can attach to the PC and come to the terminal. Now remember, 9600 bits, 8 data bits, no parity, 1 stop bit, flow control none. These defaults are going to be enough to get us onto the CLI here for the router. And it's going to be from here that we enter in a number of commands. Now, just like the switches, the routers have a user exec mode, and that is the mode that we're on or in here in the default login prompt, where it just simply says router. So let's go from user exec to privilege exec. Again, the commands are going to be strikingly similar to what we did on the switch. Now, it wants us to display the running config. So I'm going to say show running config from privilege exec mode, which again is indicated by that pound sign or the hash sign that you see there. So let's go ahead and hit enter, and we'll scroll down a little bit here using the enter key. I could hit the space bar, but then it's going to give us a screen full at a time. And you can see that the host name, it says, what is the router's host name? Well, it's the default, right? It's just simply router. And you can see that right up here as I kind of went past that by mistake. And how many fast Ethernet interfaces does the router have? Now, the activity is asking you for fast Ethernet interfaces. However, when we take a look here, we can see we've got 2 gigabit Ethernet interfaces, 2 serial interfaces, and then we have 1, 2, 3, 4 fast Ethernet interfaces. Now, this might very well be a switching module that has been placed into router 1. How can I see that? Well, I can click on router 1 and I can see right here it's the HWIC4 ESW. And what that is it gives me 4 fast Ethernet ports. You can see it's the hardware interface card, which is right here, this HWIC4 ESW, and I can insert that card into a slot on the back of this 1900 series router. And then over here, if I hover just a little bit and wait, you can see this is the HWIC2T. This is going to give me 2 serial ports that I could use. So we've got these 4 switching modules, 4 switching ports over here on the left-hand side, and 2 serial ports here on the right-hand side that have been put into the router. And remember, in order to make changes on the router, we would need to power the router off if we wanted to add cards in, or we would need to power the router back on after we have added cards in. All right, and the CLI tab is locked, and that's why they've got us connecting here via the console cable. So how many gigabit Ethernet interfaces does the router have? We've got 2, and then we've got 2 serial interfaces. What about the range of VTY lines? Well, here on the router, it's just simply 0 through 4. Now, sometimes you'll see 0 through 4. Other times you'll see 0 through 15. It just simply depends in large part on the iOS. If we were to go to a real Cisco router here, and this is a 2811. So this is the generation of routers prior to the 1900 series that we're looking at in the packet tracer activity. And if I was to say show run and pipe that to section, and we're going to say line VTY. Again, I just want to see the VTY section. And let's see what we've got here. And so on this older iOS, which is 15.1 code, you can see that we also have only 4 VTY lines. On the switches, we had many more. But again, on the router here, we're seeing it's 0 through 4, so a total of 5. All right. So we've taken a look at that, and let's go ahead and continue down here. It says display the contents of Nvram. And so it wants us to say show startup config. And as you can see, it says startup config not present. Again, if I was to say dir and do a question mark, you can see that I can say nvram colon, and there's no files that are in Nvram. So our non-volatile random access memory, which is where the startup configuration is stored, because that is the configuration that the router uses when it boots, and it loads it into running RAM, which is volatile. And so that's our running config. Keeping in mind that until we save the running config to the startup config, the changes that we've made will not be there if the router gets unplugged and plugged back in, or turned off and turned on, or reloaded. Although you will get prompted if you go to reload and you've made changes, but those changes haven't been saved. So why does the router respond with the startup configs not present? And that's because the file is not there. We have not created a startup config. We haven't saved the running config yet. All right, so now we're going to configure some initial settings here on router 1. Again, this should kind of be old hat now. So we'll get into global config, and the first thing we're going to do is configure our host name. So host name R1, right? So now we know what router we're logged onto. Again, highly recommend no IP domain lookup, right? Remember, this is preventing me from mistyping a command in privilege exec mode and having the router interpret that as it does by default to be a host name. And then it tries to do a DNS lookup on that host name to resolve the host name to an IP address. We don't want that. We want to make sure that if we make a typo in privilege exec, that it simply just tells us, hey, I have no clue what that command is, and you know what? I don't even know that host name because I'm not doing domain lookup. So we say no IP domain lookup. So let's add in our banner message of the day. And here they want us to say unauthorized access is strictly prohibited. And again, if you are working in a government context or a 3-letter agency context, you can rest assured that the banner MOTD message will be much longer and way more verbose than unauthorized access is strictly prohibited. All right, so now it wants us to encrypt all plain text passwords. Well, remember, if I was to say do show run and pipe it to section line VTY or line con, you can see that we don't have any passwords set up yet. We don't have an enable password. We don't have passwords on the console line, and there are no passwords defined on the VTY, or no password defined on the VTY lines. So we're going to put the command in here first, and we're simply going to say service password encryption. And that is going to enable the encryption of all plain text passwords. Now, what kind of encryption is it using? Remember, on the VTY and console lines, we're going to end up with type 7 passwords, which are extremely easy to crack. So keep that in mind. It's for shoulder surfers. That's what the type 7's for. All right, so the privilege exec password it says unencrypted Cisco. So what does that mean? So privilege exec, well, we have to type the enable command to get into privilege exec mode. And so that's what we're saying here. And you can see we've got two different options here, password and secret. So it wants the unencrypted password to be Cisco. And again, remember, when it says encrypt all plain text passwords, really what it's saying is sort of hash all the plain text passwords is really what's happening there. So enable password is Cisco. The encrypted password, when we say enable secret, enable secret is going to be it's a secret. Right now, this is going to be encrypted. It's a type 5 password. It's going to be using an MD5 hash to give us what is definitely going to appear to be an encrypted string. Now, on the console line, it doesn't say anything about the VTY lines, but on the console line, line con 0, it wants us to go ahead and set the password to let me in. Now, remember, we need to instruct the console line where to ask for that password or when to ask for it. And it's when the user goes to log in via the console line. Another setting that we want to have on the console line is logging synchronous. Again, this is going to make sure that if the screen is cluttered with syslog messages, that we have some clarity in terms of the CLI and that it puts the command line interface back where it was before the messages started coming to the screen. Again, it's not asking for anything via the VTY because we don't have any remote connectivity to this router, right? Remember, the console line connection, think of it as local connectivity because that PC is going to have to be pretty darn close to the router in order to get that cable plugged in. So we've got logging synchronous, we've got our password set, and now it wants us to verify the initial settings on router 1. So view or verify the initial settings by viewing the configuration. Well, we could say end and take us out to privilege exec and then say show run. We can see that there is our secret password type 5. There's the enable password type 7, right? Very easy to crack that, cut and paste and go to any website out there that can crack a type 7. There's our no IP domain lookup. And then we'll continue down here a little bit further. And we see the banner message of the day. And then we see our console line configuration. It says exit the current console session and then we just type exit to get out of there. And now it wants us to type enter. And we're going to see the banner message of the day in addition to the password prompt, which is simply let me in. And now that gets me in. But since we've set a password now on the enable mode to get into privilege exec mode, we're going to be prompted for that password. And remember, what I was going to say was, remember when you have both the enable password and the enable secret set, it's the enable secret that takes precedence. That's the password that we're going to be entering in. And you'll see that that's exactly how this will work. Now, remember also that we're putting, they're having us put in both passwords as a, hey, let's check to see if you understand the two different ways you can enter an enable password. But in reality, you are not going to have that enable password on there. And I mean the enable password, which is the type 7. That is not something you're going to configure because that is something, again, that is very easy to crack. You're going to be using a type 5 and realistically, there are type 8 and type 9 passwords that you should be using instead of type 5s. But we'll get to that a little ways on here. So for right now, we're going to stick about talking with that secret type 5. All right, so why should every router have a message of the day? Well, it's about legal repercussions, right? And you want to make sure that you're stating that if they're not supposed to be on the device, that they log off. If you're not prompted for a password before reaching the exec prompt, what console line command did you forget to configure? And so that would be, it says if you're prompted or if you're not prompted for a password before reaching the exec prompt, we forgot to put the login command on the console line. So let's go ahead now and type in enable, and we want to transition to privilege exec, and it's a secret is the password that we're going to type in there. Now, why would the enable secret password allow access to privilege exec mode and the enable password no longer be valid? So remember, that's because the enable secret takes precedence, and rightly so, over the enable password command. Very, very important. And again, once you've got the enable secret, you're going to remove that enable password command that you have in there. You don't want that to be sitting there, especially if it has the same password as the enable secret password. You want to make sure you take care of yourself there on the enable secret password setup. All right. If you configure any more passwords on the router, are they displayed in the configuration as plain text or encrypted? Well, remember, we use service password encryption. And so those passwords are going to be encrypted. All right, so save the running configuration. So here we are. Let's just say copy running config, startup config, and that's one way to do it. And remember, you can say write memory. And again, how can we consolidate this command? That's actually what they're asking us for here. So let's go ahead and start out with CO. Remember, for command completion, there needs to be a uniqueness for the CLI, the iOS, to complete the command. And you can see here that CO, we'd have to have a P in there, right, for COP. And then here you can see running config is the only thing that starts with an R. So I can say cop R. Now, what if I said cop RS? You can see that it might be SCP, it might be startup config. So let's see if this works. Yeah, you can see ambiguous command. It doesn't understand what's going on there. But now if I say cop RST, it's actually going to work. But the true test is let's go out to a real Cisco router and let's get logged in here and let's get into privilege exec. And you can see write mem is going to save the running config. Now, if I say CO question mark, you can see that we have the same three options, configure, connect, copy. So here I can get away with the cop, so that's legit. Let's do a question mark and see what we have that starts with R. Now, you'll notice there's an RCP colon, a running config, so maybe there could be some confusion, but let's give it a go here. We'll say cop R, and then I'll do a question mark. And you can see for the startup config, if I just simply said S, maybe it's not going to work. And let's see if cop RS works. And it does, right? But did it save it, dir Nvram, colon, did it save it to, oh, and we don't have the date and the time set. So the question is, did it save it here? And so my recommendation would be cop R and then ST. So cop R ST, and that's going to copy the running config to the startup config. And again, when you saw RCP, I would even say, and let me change what I had there, cop RUST to make sure it's running config to startup config. And there we go, right? So very similar on a real Cisco router. So to end things up, the shortest unambiguous version of the command was cop RS, or I think it said cop RST here in Packet Tracer. And all right, we've been learning about managing flash storage in a router. Yeah, so this is basically talking about showing the flash. So if I said show flash, you can see that this is where the iOS is kept. Now, another way to see that is you can simply just say dir in most cases. So show flash is going to give it to you in a different format, and you're going to get some different information. But I typically just type dir, right? And dir by default is going to show me flash. And it says how many files are currently stored in flash. Here you can see, and I like how it lists out 1, 2, 3, right? So we see there's 3 files. How would you guess the iOS image? Well, it's got the version number in here, and it's also a binary file that's going to be uncompressed and pulled into memory to run. And why do you think this file is the iOS image? Again, it's based off the version number that you can see in here and the model number of the router. And it's also substantially larger than the rest of the files in this directory. So the router prompts you to store in Flash using the name in brackets. If the answer is yes, press enter. If not, oh, they just want me to, okay, so we're going to create a backup copy basically. So copy startup, sorry, not TFTP, copy startup config, right? So remember, this is the configuration that we've saved off, and we're going to create a copy of it in Flash. So destination file name is going to be startup config. So now if I say dir, there is a backup copy. But again, that doesn't help me much. What might be a better way to do this is to say flash colon and then say backup config, or something along those lines, bck dash config, and put in today's date 01/24/2021, and then maybe who stored it in here. And it should let us do that. I'm wondering if this is a packet tracer thing here, or if it's looking for something like that. Yeah, because if I was to come over here and say copy startup config to, whoops, copy startup config, you can see that I can say flash colon, and then we'll say, backup CFG dash 01/24/2021 dash TP bond fee, hit enter, and it's going to work, right? So that was a packet tracer thing that we saw over there. But when I say dir now, I mean, take a look at that. That's a little more descriptive than startup config. Startup config from when, right? Startup config from 5 years ago, from, it'll have a timestamp on it, but you don't know how many startup configs you've had in between, right? And that can get a little confusing. Now, here's another recommendation I'm going to make to you. And this is typically what I do, is I create a directory with the make dir command, flash colon, and we'll call it backup underscore CFGs, or just backup configs. We'll say backup underscore CFGs. And it's going to create a directory for me. And you see, now we've got this directory. Because again, when you hit dir, I want to see the iOS. I want to see things that are going to be important. And again, there's a reason you're not seeing the iOS here, which I will not get into right now. But there is an iOS here. It's just that you don't see it. So you create a directory, and it's in the directory that we save these files. And so I would say flash colon backup underscore CFGs / right? And that's the separator between the directory name and the file name. And now every time I do a change, right, or I make a change, I want to back up the gold copy, the working, running config that I know is working on the router in case I need to pull it back at a later date. Now all I have to say is dir. So what if I say backup underscore CFGs without putting flash in there? Remember, flash is there by default. So now I've got a directory into which I can place all these backup configurations so that they're not going to muddle up and complicate me trying to look and figure out what is actually here at the top level, which is typically, we're coming in to look for that iOS image. All right, well, that is going to do it for this packet tracer activity 10.1.4, where we were configuring initial router settings. All right, guys, thanks so much for watching. If you have any questions, please let me know. And as always, I hope to see you in the next video.